It is Wednesday, November 13th, 2024 from Montreal. This is episode 9 of Night Talk. Good evening. I'm Gary MacDonald.
And I'm Eddie Tekalik, equally from Montreal.
And before we get started, Eddie, just a reminder to people watching, please, by all means, join in on the conversations. If you're on YouTube, join into the YouTube chat off to the right of your screen. Enter your comment, and we will try to feature as many comments as possible. If you're watching on Facebook, then by all means, just post your comment as you normally would on Facebook, and it'll pop up on our screen. And we will try to feature as many comments as possible. We really want to get you involved in the discussion. We don't want to just hear our thoughts. We want to hear your thoughts as well. So, Eddie, it's been what you might say another busy week in the wake of last week's runaway victory by former President Donald Trump. And he's wasted no time in getting down to business, naming a number of people for key positions in his administration. One of those is his so-called border czar, Tom Homan, who will oversee Trump's promised deportation of illegal migrants, raising a number of concerns which Homan addressed in a recent interview with an upstate New York TV station.
It will be a targeted enforcement operation concentrating on criminals and national security threats first. The numbers on the northern border are higher than they've ever been. Some sectors on the northern border are up 800%. We're going to address that right off the bat. So it's a matter of resources. It's a matter of tough conversations with Canada, regardless what your opinion is on illegal immigration. When the border's out of control, that's when you have 250,000 Americans dying from fentanyl. That's when you have sex trafficking increased by 600%. That's you have a record number of terrorists being arrested coming across the southern border and the northern border. And remember, we just arrested 8 that were planning a Russian-type event here just 2 months ago, so we know they're here. So I think people realize you can't have national security. You can't have strong national security unless you have border security. We got to know what's coming in, who's coming in, why it's coming in, where it's coming in.
In the southern borders, in terms of families being torn apart, children being torn away from their parents and locked up in cages. It was all over the news here in Canada, of course, around the world, and that's essentially the setting that illegal immigrants into the United States had to face, and that was regardless if they were hardworking, law-abiding, tax-paying, illegal immigrants. A lot of them still got picked up and rounded up by ICE and sent on their way, sometimes with their children and sometimes without their children. So it was a very difficult scenario, and a lot of folks basically packed up their bags and try to identify where do we move next. And a lot of them came up to Canada, a significant amount, and the number escapes me right now, but the Roxham Road border crossing is basically farmers' fields crossing into Canada, and the Border Patrol in Canada and RCMP set up a portable post to arrest these individuals on the spot, and then help them out as much as they can, us being Canadians, in terms of lending out a helping hand. But I personally believe that what we saw during Trump's first presidency, or his reign, is going to be a small crapshoot compared to what I believe and what I'm hearing Canada is expecting to see this time around. It wasn't just a question of all the rhetoric behind it, but as you can see with the immediate appointment of a lot of key people in key posts in his administration, especially with former ICE head and director Mr. Tom Homan. They're gonna start running. They're not gonna wait 2 or 3 months or 6 months. They're gonna start now. And of course, now, as you and I know, Gary, winter's upon us, or is getting upon us. I think this is basically going to be there's going to be a lot of tragedy and a lot of heartache of a lot of good people trying to cross the border with their families and trying to make a better life for themselves, right? You know what? 1 out of maybe 1,000 might be a bad apple, but you get that in pretty much every country, right? So our challenge, of course, Gary, is going to be how are we going to manage this? Don't forget, to our viewers that are not familiar with the Canadian and U.S. border, we're talking about 5,500 miles of unprotected border. This is the largest unprotected border in the world. So, apart from coming in through official ports of entries, you can drive a tank through some of these border crossings, especially in the prairies, in the wooded areas, and no one will know that you're here. So, what are we going to do? It's a big question. And for the individuals that do come across, how do we attend to them, right?
Well, I know I saw a clip from an RCMP officer the other day, and he was saying that, I guess we're going to have to rent more trailers and buy more buildings in the areas where they seem to cross, where they feel that there's not as much surveillance along that particular section of the border. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, these people are undocumented. So we have no idea who they are, really. Holman makes a very strong case on the initial deportation, and they're going after known criminals and terrorists. But the fact of the matter is, you still have to do some kind of vetting to find out who they are. We all of a sudden, because of this threat hanging over them in the U.S., there's no doubt we're going to see a surge of people, and it's probably already started, where they're coming up through and they're paying people to get them to the Canadian side of the border as they did before. And we know that ended in tragedy on more than one occasion, here in Quebec and between Quebec and Ontario.
Correct.
Why should we all of a sudden have to deal with a problem that the U.S. has not been able to solve because they've not been able to plug the loopholes on their southern border with Mexico?
You know what? Great question. I think every politician on Parliament Hill is asking themselves those same questions. Trudeau's cabinet is asking themselves this question. I'm sure that they're working or having discussions with the opposition across the floor to identify what do we need to do to work together to make sure we don't end up with another situation that the United States claims with their southern border and the problems, right? And here in Canada, from a citizenship perspective, what do we do? Do we want this? Do you help out a person in need? Why should we be the ones bearing the brunt of what the United States is doing in terms of expulsing illegal immigrants out there? And you know what? If they're going to be vetting out the illegals that are not law-abiding citizens or criminals and whatnot, fantastic. Then perhaps what's left is individuals that are going to be coming up here that may be less prone to the criminal element, if you want to say, or the terrorist organizations. But by the same token, you get 20,000 people a month crossing the border into Canada. That's 20,000 people that you and I, Gary, and Canadian taxpayers are going to have to take care of as part of being human beings. I mean, we don't want to just say, too bad, we're going to put you on a boat and send you someplace, when we can't probably afford to do that either. So why, as Canadians, do we have to deal with this? As Canadians, should we be billing the United States for all the turmoil that they created with their policies in the United States? Sometimes you look at it, and I don't want to use the word garbage unnecessarily here, but why should we Canadians have to deal with the garbage that's going on in the United States and be quiet about it? I don't think we should. I think there should be some sort of consequences in the United States for not properly managing this potential human tragedy that's going to be presenting itself at our borders.
Well, Holman said in the interview that I watched today that in fact there are 2 million what he called getaways, and those are people, as he suggested, who had more money to pay to get around even the looser parts of the Mexican border that still have some patrols, but not all that many patrols, but there are other points where there are blind spots all along there. And so he said that if those people have that kind of money, they don't want to have their documentation verified, then that tells him that they're criminals and or terrorists, and they're looking for a way to get in and get settled and get prepared to do whatever they're going to do. And the other thing that he raised, and again, it's a valid point. The more I listened to the guy, he was very calm in that interview, as you saw in the clip that I played, but very straightforward and businesslike, and he did make a lot of sense. But he also pointed out as well that the cartels are moving a lot of fentanyl through the border and in through with these people as well, and then spreading it out to their, for lack of a better term, retail networks in the U.S.
Right.
And so again, I'm looking at it, and you raised a really good point. What do Canadians think? Do Canadians think that, in fact, if we get inundated with a number of these migrants, should we have that? He talked about a difficult conversation with Canada. Yeah, and the biggest difficulty will be, how are you going to pay when we bill you for the cost? Because even earlier this week or late last week, Premier Francois Legault said, if this is going to, become an issue again, we need more help than we received the last time from Ottawa, and we need more money to help deal with it, because
which wasn't a whole lot of help, actually.
Yeah, exactly. So it ended up costing Quebec taxpayers a fair chunk of change. And then the other part of it was trying to get the other provinces to take their share of these people. And, the hands didn't go up all that quickly as far as the other premiers were concerned, and for very good reason. However, the other side of it is, if some of these people are legitimate and they really are here to set up a new life for themselves and their families, great. Okay. However,
we've seen and heard a lot of success stories with that, from Syria and other parts of the world. They're contributing society, and they're doing great here.
Right. But the other part of it is, Eddie, that yes, we can set up sort of a system where each province gets, so many thousand. But how long are they going to stay there before they want to come back to specifically Ontario, BC, and Quebec? Because those are the major centers of commerce, really, between the Vancouver area and, of course, Ontario and Toronto and the corridor down along Lake Ontario to Niagara Falls, right. Windsor, in that area. That's where the heavyweight economy, the economic engine, sit in this country, and we've noticed that. If you do a trending, you'll see where eventually they do migrate to that area to set up their businesses or live in, whatever jobs they're taking. So I think that's a really good point, and I'd really like to see some feedback on that tonight. And if you don't have a chance to do it tonight during the live stream, then or you're watching the video replay in the next couple of days, by all means, leave a comment on the YouTube page so we can feature some of those comments in our next program, because that is just an excellent question. I don't know why I didn't think of that beforehand, but that's a really
you're rubbing
question.
Off on me, Gary. That's what it is. I'm learning from the best.
Yeah, but it makes me wonder too. If you recall, in late last month, the federal government announced that it was cutting back on its immigration quotas over the next year, maybe 2 years, I think, and cutting, where was it here? Reduce the number of permanent residents in 2025 from a previous target of 500,000 down to 5,000, a 21% drop. And of course, they also cut the numbers for international students and
Yeah. Yeah, but
others.
that's the whole thing, though. I mean, what you're saying here, they're going to be cutting back. Well, this is cutting back on naturalizing people that have come across our borders to become permanent residents in Canada and eventually citizens, hopefully, right? Now, what we're talking about is hundreds upon hundred thousands of people crossing the border because they've got no place else to go. And it's not like, oh, well, this is above and beyond the regular immigration that we actually contend with on a monthly and a year-to-year basis. So, all those numbers that you mentioned, it's based on an official and through an official channel and official capacity that I don't think it speaks specifically to refugee claimants, because this is what these people are going to be doing, crossing the border from the States to Canada, is claiming refugee status. So the numbers that you had just mentioned are going to be way more inflated as the year progresses, and as Mr. Tom Homam actually begins getting his work started. So it comes down to what you're saying, Gary, too. Just overall, what is the Canadian appetite to do something like this, to deal with something like this? If memory serves, I think there was a poll taken not too long ago. I think it was actually before the American election, where Canadians across the country were asked, what they thought about our immigration policies and plans for immigration and cutting back. And I think 60% of the respondents came out and actually said, we already have way too many immigrants. Okay, so it comes down to the appetite. And then, on the other hand, in terms of the same polls, the question was asked on whether you as a Canadian would have voted for a Trump administration or for a Harris administration. And 68% of Canadians said they would have voted Harris. So, where do these numbers start conflicting in terms of their accuracy and the message they're trying to convey? I know here in Quebec, the folks are a lot more vocal, or sorry, I'll rephrase that. The politicians are a lot more vocal in terms of the number of immigrants they are absorbing here, and then the question of what to do with them, and further complicated by the linguistic requirements to actually live in this province, which make it that much more difficult. So again, it comes down to the appetite of Canadian citizens, and then the appetite of our governments to absorb this, and how much are we going to absorb? And that's the whole question, Gary. It's easy to say, welcome to Canada, we love human beings, we love people, we don't want you to suffer, we're going to take care of you. Well, how many people can we possibly take care of while they get on their feet? And then add to that, in Quebec, the complexity of language, where I believe you have 6 months to learn a language, while they're cutting the French language teacher workforce here because there's no money. So it really introduces a tremendously perplexing question to everybody across the country, because the onslaught is coming, no question about it. And there's been a lot of chatter and a lot of discussion about what they're going to be doing, and not that they came out with any details from the federal government perspective, but they've already been planning for this. What are we going to have in terms of a policy if Mr. Trump wins, which happened by a landslide? What's going to happen when if Ms. Harris actually won the election? How are we going to deal with it? So I'm really hopeful that whatever plans the Liberal government has, they're going to come up with it sooner rather than later, because, like I said, once the first arrests happen in the United States and the first people are put on trains and planes and automobiles or whatever they're going to do in internment camps, which would be a worse situation, we're going to start seeing people coming across the border. And how many of them are going to choose, well, you know what, are they going to do the research? Are they going to learn about Quebec and its French language requirements? What about the rest of Canada? And also the other thing, Gary, is like, what kind of individuals are we actually going to be getting up here in Canada? Like you mentioned, they're going to be going through the major transfer points in Montreal, in Canada, like Montreal, your Torontos, your Windsors, and so on and so forth, right? Are we going to get the illegal immigrant in the United States that possesses a degree coming up here? Or are we going to be getting individuals who were farmhands in the United States who now fear that they're going to get thrown out of the country. You know, would they not prefer choosing moving up to the prairie provinces where we constantly bring in foreign hands to help with the crops, so on and so forth? So what kind of individuals are we going to be getting up here? I kind of put my money down on people not being too highly educated showing up here in Canada. So then how do we integrate these individuals in our country when they may not necessarily have tertiary education or tertiary skill sets where they can actually become professionals up here? I would suffice it to say that a lot of these individuals are probably your mom and pop hardworking people, you know. And where do you place all of these individuals? Where do you house them? How do you educate them? Big task, which is why we should send them a bill every month, paid in full.
Yeah, absolutely. Either that or, you know, and I already floated this one in a conversation this morning, and there were a few choice words to describe how they felt. But
Oh yeah?
yeah, oh yeah.
Who with? Can you tell me?
Anyway,
Nobody's with me, but I wasn't with you today.
no. Anyhow, you know, the other side of it is, and it was more. I shouldn't even say tongue in cheek, but the fact of the matter is, like, you could just say, all right, instead of renting trailers, instead of buying buildings, and all of a sudden overloading all of our social safety nets.
Mm-hmm.
Charter some buses and have them waiting, and then just take them right back to the nearest port of entry for the U.S., open the door, and then say to the border people in the U.S., these are yours. They came from your country. Toodly-doo.
Mm-hmm.
That's an extreme.
Yeah, harder said than done, because those guys have big guns at the border too. I don't forget that.
Yeah, but that's right. Yeah, they don't mess around. But
No.
it's something, and I wonder if part of this reduction as well, not only is it the, you know, as you said earlier, the Canadian population in general has been exhausted, I guess, maybe. Their goodwill has been exhausted in relation to immigration into the country. However, I wonder too if some of these cuts that were announced in late October were in anticipation of Trump winning and what may come of that because of his push to get the illegal migrants out of his country.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think Trudeau said when he announced them that we emerged from the pandemic between addressing labor needs and maintaining population growth. We didn't get the balance quite right. Wow. Anyhow, so it's going to be like, I didn't hear much of a response to Legault's plea to Ottawa for, you know, we're going to need some real help here. I haven't really noticed anything in the media. I haven't really heard anything in the media. I'm not saying that Trudeau or somebody in the federal government didn't respond, but, you know, they're going to have to loosen the purse strings. And, you know, this is one of those things that you don't need at this particular point in time, as far as the impact on the finances of the country.
Absolutely. I mean, we have enough to deal with here on a good day in terms of funding all the wonderful programs we have in place in Canada. The last thing we need is to increase any sort of federal deficits or the purses in every province having to deal with all these unfortunate people having no home to go to, and you know, and to be able to deal with them as I guess as human beings. And it's, you know, like you were saying, you know, we're Canadians are getting tired of people exploiting our welcoming generosity to this country, and it's getting to a point that our patience levels are definitely getting taxed. So is this going to be at the end of the day when the government has to contend with this, like Mr. Trudeau having to contend with this with the election looming next November or much earlier? Is he going to do the right thing beyond just making sure he gets selected, or is he going to listen to the peanut gallery and basically abide by what they're doing and tough luck? It's a real hard one. I mean, I'm not just saying just Canadians, but there's a lot of good-hearted people around this planet. If something like that does happen in their country, how welcoming are they going to be, and for how long? As a human being, you want to help another human being out as much as you can, but how far do you go with that? Are you and I willing to give up our dental plans here in Canada because of the fact there's no more money left for it because we have to redivert our funds to be able to help the immigrants? In terms of our Canadian pensions, do you want our Canadian pensions to be further delayed or decreased in value in terms of how much you're getting every month because the necessary funding had to go to securing our borders in a more aggressive fashion, or finding this necessary housing and feeding these individuals until they get back on their feet? I don't know, Gary. As a citizen, I've worked very hard in my life to get to where I am right now, and just to toss it aside because of something that's going on in the United States or in other parts of the world, it's a hard sell over a period of time. Initially, I believe we should help, but to what degree? How do you put an end to it? How do you say, yeah, you know what, Mr. and Mrs. whoever, we'll take your 5 people, and by the way, the other 5 family members won't be able to come into the country. Like, how does that work?
All right.
So there's just so much to deal with and contend with, and I really hope Mr. Trudeau has had his people working on this for quite some time, ever since Donald started rattling the cages and his polls started to shoot through the roof after he got charged as a criminal. That's a whole other story in itself.
Yeah.
But from that point onward, Mr. Trudeau had to look at this extremely seriously because the fellow was on his way to winning, and he did.
And we have a comment. Not only poor souls escaping deportation to possible death, but Americans, mostly women and children, escaping a totalitarian state. Wow.
Yeah.
And there is a good point there when you look at some of the rhetoric that was tossed around on the Republican side in particular during the election campaign, even over the last 2 or 3 years. It's there are a lot of women on social media platforms like TikTok and others, and they are expressing some real concerns about, first of all, not being able to have a choice as to how they deal with their own bodies, through to what sort of rights are we going to have when, and is it going to be carte blanche on sexual attacks and things like that.
Yeah, no, I get that too.
So some real food for thought there, especially in the last couple of words about the women and children escaping from the U.S. And thank you for that, Deborah. Okay. It's going to be interesting to watch this unfold over the next couple of weeks, and I'm sure we're going to have more to say about it as we move along. But, okay, that was sudden. A little technical glitch there. Sorry about that. I get sidetracked easily sometimes. But there are more side effects from last week's U.S. presidential election. The Democrats are beginning a period of soul-searching as to what went wrong and why. Well, are there lessons to be learned for the federal Liberals on this side of the border? Well, if they're not already soul searching, and some of them in the party are, but there are others in the party who don't want to hear that. Eddie, any thoughts on that one?
Well, soul searching. So, here we have two distinctly different types of governments in North America, largest countries in North America, with two distinctly different populations. Okay, so as the Democrats are essentially trying to understand what went wrong, what went right, I'm sure that the Trudeau Liberals, or whatever political party is vying for the government seat in the next election, are equally asking themselves those questions and saying, what went wrong in the United States? What didn't the Democrats do? What did the not only that, what did the Republicans do right? What did Trump do right? Okay, so you can learn from both the bad and the good side of any sort of occurrence or any sort of event. They're doing the same thing up here. In my opinion, Gary, the significant difference in terms of vying for the vote, I think, will be fundamentally and strategically different between what the Canadian political parties need to do versus what the American political parties have done and continue to do. And that is the audience. The audience is you and me in Canada. The audience is Joe Blow and the millionaire and the doctor in the United States. We think differently. Okay, values seem to be a little different, and I think that one of the reflections that the Democratic Party in the United States is looking at is, did we not target the audience in the United States that did not want to think of any sort of Democrat in power? Did we properly target an audience where we would have expected more women to vote for Kamala, and why didn't they? And the Latino and the African American population, what is it that we as a Democratic Party did not do to get the vote of confidence from these individuals? And what did the Republican Party do correctly? I'm not sure whether in Canada they have to go down to that level of thought in terms of going down to education levels, go down to race, go down to religion or anything like that. I'm just starting to feel a shift in the way a lot of these right-wing organizations, not just in the United States, or we have them in Canada, but in prolific areas like Germany and whatnot in Europe, that it seems to me that a lot of society seems to be enamored with strongman ideologies. I don't know why there seems to be that shift, but there just seems to be a shift towards strongman ideologies and appreciating them and essentially voting them into power. On the other side, you look at what the Democratic Party did is they spoke plans, they spoke action, they spoke to all walks of life in the United States. They put plans on their desks. They spoke directly with people. They were not afraid of having dialogue with people across the floor. They were not afraid of having dialogue with a lot of these media outlets that are more right-wing centric, sat down and basically discussed. Whereas on the other hand, you very rarely saw folks from the Republican side crossing the table and having those types of open dialogue with the general media. So are we looking at a shift here, Gary, where individuals are not so much concerned with the moral obligations of the leaders of states, the governors, and the country. Because, I mean, we're looking at two different extremes when it comes to humanity of individuals and what those individuals convey in terms of how they're going to serve the country and how they're going to serve the people. One extremely off the charts, and the other one very human in terms of her approach. Yet, Donald Trump won a resounding victory. So does that say that the American population is just bewildered by that type of a character? They're bewildered with reality show type of material that will attract their attention? I don't know. It just, I'm still flabbergasted by the result. Most people that I've spoken to and have reached out to me are just completely floored by the result last week, and most of them have actually expressed what's this world coming to? What's the United States coming to? How can somebody vote for an individual like this? Is it possible that Republican voters see something that you and I, as Canadian citizens, don't see from up here? Do they see some kind of value in Mr. Trump and his cohort? Hard for us to fathom that, but maybe that's what's going on down there. So up here in Canada, does Mr. Trudeau or Mr. Poilievre have to really study and understand the psyche of the Canadian citizen? What is it that's going to gain their attention, attract their attention, which is going to equate into a vote for that for that particular party? I you know what? You and I both know that no politician using the rhetoric that the Republican Party and Donald Trump used in the United States election would work here at all. It would never work here. We'd probably put these individuals in prison or lock them up in a hospital somewhere. It's just not something that's readily acceptable in Canadian society. So I don't think that the politicians have to worry about the same thing that the Democratic Party in the United States has to. Maybe they got to put somebody up there that just starts spewing rhetoric in the Democratic Party, and maybe they're going to get the votes that they actually need to go into power, which would be extremely sad because that doesn't convey what their values represent to the United States, right? Enough said.
Well, to a couple of your points, Eddie, the Democrats, I think within the party itself, there were a lot of Democrats not happy with the way everything unfolded as far as Biden and how long it took for him to realize it's time to step aside. And then they didn't have a convention. They didn't have any other people, coming forward with their names. It was just all of a sudden they were Kamala Harris was thrust upon them, and that was it. And everything, it had to do with timing as well. They didn't have a whole lot of time. However, when you think of it, I think there may have been warring factions as well within the party where she may have had a younger and somewhat inexperienced team driving the bus, if you will, as far as the overall campaign and the messaging. Initially, there was a surge, you could feel it in the air, almost a surge of hope.
Right.
When Biden finally stepped aside and Harris was it. Mm-hmm. On both sides of the border, really. However, she never really built on that momentum. She peaked very early, and it became, as one Democratic pundit said one day last week, the party very quickly took on an air of elitists overall with the concerts and all of the celebrity endorsements. And I said to you a couple of shows ago, a celebrity endorsement, big deal. What's it worth? Whatever it costs you to ride the bus. If that, so there was that. But the one thing that kept coming through, and I think the Republicans picked up on it in their approach to Harris, was there was no real solid vision for the future that she was putting out there. When I reflect back on the campaign and watching some of her speeches and that sort of thing, it was all sort of very airy, if you will, but nothing really solid. And Trump, in particular, as much as I really don't care for the guy at all, he did hit what the average American was concerned about: the cost of living, the cost of gasoline for their vehicles, those kinds of things. Everything else, yes, he threw in. I mean, it was always a mixed salad whenever he opened his mouth. But he had those key points about reducing the cost of living. I'm going to reduce your cost of living. I'm going to get rid of the illegal migrants and reduce crime as a result. Those sorts of things that were really of concern to the average American.
Yeah.
So that message hit home. The Democrats spent $1 billion in advertising. Think about that for a minute. $1 billion with a message that said what, really? Again, it was kind of airy. There was no real, they didn't zero in on what the average American was really thinking about and really worried about. And I see that happening here in Canada. Poilievre has been very successful with his Axe the Tax and Axe the Tax election, and zeroing in again on cost of living issues, groceries and the impact of the carbon tax on all kinds of prices. But I haven't heard a lot of solid evidence or at least ideas to back up those glitzy phrases. On the other side, you have Trudeau, who is becoming even more of an elitist than he ever was, and he's completely out of touch with reality, and so are a lot of his staunch supporters sitting around the cabinet table. And that is one reason why, when he drags the party to defeat in the next federal election, which he will, and it's really it is too late for them for him to resign and for them to get a leader in place and make any kind of a showing that's going to be, if they have a slightly better showing than what they're going to get with Trudeau at the helm, it'll be very, very minor. And especially if they pick somebody that already has served in the cabinet and has been with Trudeau over the last 9 to 10 years, they've got a lot of baggage coming with them.
And it's true. I mean, it's...
So they need to start looking now and start thinking, okay, we're not going to win this election, but how do we get this party back on its feet as quickly as possible so we're not dragging on 5, 6, 7 years?
Right.
And, I don't have a whole lot of confidence. Actually, I have no confidence in the Trudeau government handling what's facing us right now with this, what we were talking about in the first segment of the show, this surge of migrants, undocumented migrants coming in. I have no confidence in them being able to handle it in any kind of a even remote organized manner that's going to be beneficial to all concerned. Look at what they did with TikTok, for God's sakes. They've been back and forth because the U.S. government's been back and forth, and the U.S. government was, when Trump was in, was pressuring, and Biden was looking at it, and so what happens? A year ago in February, they banned TikTok from government phones. Well, you know what? It should never have been on there in the first place, for sure. And now they've told TikTok to pack up your Canadian operations and get out. However, Canadians, even though it's based on a national security issue, which they haven't told us what that issue is or issues are, Canadians are free to use TikTok as much as they want. Now, not only that, but check this out. Was it yesterday? It comes out that federal government departments are still okay to advertise on TikTok.
Yeah.
What the hell? It makes no sense.
Does somebody
None.
have TikTok stock somewhere? I don't know.
It's supposedly a security issue, a national security issue, and yet they're going to let federal governments, who I guess these guys and gals will have to use their own private phones to access TikTok and make sure that the ads are coming up the way they should, because they're not allowed to have it on their government phones.
Yeah.
Think about that for a minute. I just, it blows my mind.
Yeah,
blows my mind.
Gary, to your point, Gary, just quickly, when you were saying, in the Trudeau for the next leader of the Liberal Party in Canada, are we going to end up with somebody that's been a Trudeau supporter and a staunch crony of his for the last decade plus? Is that individual going to take the leadership role of the Liberal Party? Well, I don't think that will go over, and I agree with you very well with Canadian citizens that we're just going to get more of the same, and with very little changes, because this individual was a staunch supporter of Mr. Trudeau, who over the course of time is starting to fail miserably, or has failed miserably, and his popularity is tanking. Doesn't that kind of draw a parallel to what Kamala Harris was experiencing in the United States, where, here the Democratic Party put Kamala Harris into the spotlight immediately, and of course the media on both sides of the fence were constantly asking her, what is she going to be doing with A, B, and C, and how are you going to be doing that differently from your boss, Mr. Biden, and why haven't you done it already? So if there's anything that Mr. Trudeau or the Liberal Party of Canada should and has to learn, is you don't put somebody in charge of a political party that's the wingman of the leader of the political party that's in the mud right now. So they've got to get somebody outside of the group, or a liberal candidate, a potential that staunchly and publicly has opposed Mr. Trudeau. At least that way he can show that he is completely different to the policies before, and he's going to run the party differently, but more importantly, he's going to run the country differently. That's what they need to do. So, like you were saying, in Harris in the United States didn't really have a whole hell of a lot of time to keep the train running and experiencing ups and downs. I mean, Trump was in this for what, 16 months, 18 months, where he was at the top of the pile, and then he was in the
last
bottom
4
of the
years,
pile, and then back on top of the pile and back in the bottom. So he had enough time to be able to put around solutions to the lulls in his candidacy, right? Harris only had one chance. So, it was an uphill climb for her right from the beginning, regardless of the fact that there was a huge surge of a feeling of hope for the country amongst a lot of individuals. But hope and joy just lasts so long, and people will go back to identifying with what their issues are, and what they would like to hear their leaders say that would sway their vote to contend with their issues. And at the end of the day, there's a lot that Harris said, and Trump said the same thing in his Trumpian way, but that still fell on a lot of deaf ears. And they ignored what she was going to do, and they went with what he was going to do. And I don't know what the exact difference was in thinking was with the female population, the African American population, the Latino population, on what Donald is going to do with all of that rhetoric that he's throwing around. Hey, do you think at the end of the day he's going to surround himself with good people and get stuff done the right way? You know what? You never know, but I don't think he's going to surprise me.
No, he's going to, and he's already started surrounding himself with loyalists, and and some of them so far with really no experience in the jobs that he's handing them. But as long as they're loyal, I heard
Yes, ma'am.
one. Yeah, I heard one. I think he was a political science professor from the States today say, as long as they're loyal, as long as he likes what he hears, and as long as they look good on TV, and bonus points if it's Fox that they're on, then he has no issue. They're in.
But that's my point right at
Yeah.
the beginning of our episode today. I said the difference between the Canadian citizen and the American citizen in terms of what excites them is completely different. So as long as you look good on television, you can joke around and not really say a whole hell of a lot and, make fun of people. Yeah, he's my man. He's my guy. So it goes to exactly what I was saying, Gary, at the beginning. It's a completely different society, and that's just a fact.
Yeah, two things I want to throw in that are related to the conversation, but a little off to the side. The first one is there was a Nanos poll out on the weekend, I believe it was, and it was asking Canadians what they thought or would they support or did they like, and they named 3 or 4 cabinet ministers to replace Trudeau, and Mark Carney. Anyway, none of them rated very well at all. Like, essentially, the poll said, no, we don't like any of them. However, if pushed, maybe Carney. I'm not sold on Mark Carney as leader of the Liberal Party, but, I want to see him in action a little more. But I don't know. Anyhow, and on the other side of the border, one other stat that the Democrats have to really think about is Donald Trump actually went on 16 podcasts. 16. And garnered in total from those podcasts an audience of 25 million.
That's a lot of people.
Harris went on 5, I think it was, and garnered an audience of approximately 4 million. And she missed out on the big one, Joe Rogan. She apparently set too many conditions, and he just said, I'm willing to give you the time, but it's my ball game, so we'll play it by my rules. And she didn't want to do that. So, and there's a whole other discussion as to, and I'm seeing it pop up more and more, a whole other discussion about has the legacy media finally swung and it's strike 3, they're out, and the digital platforms like we are on, is this the new reality? Shows like ours.
So you're speaking about magazines, newspapers, and network television.
Specifically network TV and radio. The TV, the print side of it pretty much dried up a few years ago. The broadcast side of it, on both television and radio, are where print was a number of years ago, still trying to figure out how they fit in, and they've never been able to really figure it out. Meantime, YouTube, in particular, is in the last couple of years, with the number of programs, or various videos and shows like ours that are available now, more and more people are just, it's YouTube and maybe an app or like Netflix or some of those apps, and that's it. They don't even bother with the legacy media whatsoever. But like I say, that's a discussion for another day. And Deborah has been busy. She came up with the American people did not fact check. They just believed the lies. We need to research what we were being spoon-fed. Good point. Good point. With democracy comes responsibility. And from Jim Fleming. Okay. Thank you, Gary, Mac, and Eddie, for the interesting discussion. I really don't think we can grasp how bad the situation is in the U.S. with the unchecked migration, human and child trafficking, and drug gangs becoming stronger. To watch the Dems and the Dem-dominated U.S. media turn so viciously on the BIPOC folks is telling. Unfortunately, the decent migrants who really do want to work for a better life get lost in the game. Is Canada prepared? We all know the answer to that. Wow.
Right.
Yeah. For sure. For sure. And I just realized that we jumped again. There we go. I'll put Jim's up again. And okay. There. Sorry about that. And a couple of little technical glitches along the way. So, that's something else that Holman mentioned in this interview that he did the other day, and that was, I think it's something like 300,000 children unaccounted for, but they're part of the human trafficking that's coming across the border, and as he said, they're ending up in all kinds of nasty situations, but it's part of the human trafficking cartels that are bringing them across for all sorts of different things, exploiting them to no end. As I say, when you listen to what he said in this interview, overall, the guy makes sense, and he has a solid background in police work and in border patrol work as well. So yes, he's very fiery, very direct for sure, but he had some solid points, and he had the facts to back them up, which is something you don't see a lot now. You just see the talking points and bridging back around to the talking point again. So good for him. And Jim, thank you for tuning in, and thanks for your comment. Okay, we do have another segment to cover here, because guess what? It's football weekend. The 111th Grey Cup spectacle is set for this weekend out in Vancouver, minus the defending champs. Eddie?
Yep. Well, to tell you the truth, it was not a good weekend for Montreal sports. I'll just go quickly through it. In the CIS, the University Intercollegiate Sports System here in Canada, the Montreal Carabins lost to the Laval Rouge et Or 22-17 in the Dunsmore Cup, and Laval is going to be moving on to meet the Regina Rams. And then we have Laurier and Bishop's Gators fighting on the other side. And the winners of both games are going to be vying for the 59th Vanier Cup on the 23rd of November in Kingston. So there's loss number one for Montreal. Loss number two, and Gary, too bad your brother is not on the show tonight. Our beloved Montreal Canadiens, Gary, got beat up by the Toronto Maple Leafs 4-1 last weekend as well. So that's strike number two for us Montreal sports fans. And last but not least, the Montreal Alouettes, 12-6 during the season, lost to the Toronto Argonauts, who were 10-8 during the season, 30-28. The Alouettes blew out the Argonauts statistically on the field. They played better. The only problem was too many mistakes. They turned over the ball 6 times, Gary, and 4 of those were fumbles. 4 fumbles in one game. They didn't fumble 10 times during the entire season, and they lost the ball 4 times, and you do not win football games without holding on to the ball. So I'm very disappointed. I'm not going to subscribe for season tickets next year because I'm so upset. So we're stuck with watching the Toronto Argonauts playing the Winnipeg Blue Bombers on Sunday at 6 p.m., and I believe they're playing in Vancouver. So I'm hoping it's going to be a good game. And Toronto, in fact, is not playing with their quarterback, starting quarterback. The Alouettes broke his leg just at the end of the third quarter, and they still couldn't win the game. So yeah, it was a freak accident. And yeah, so the Argonauts are going to be going in there with a journeyman quarterback, and hopefully we're going to see a very entertaining game. And usually, Grey Cup games are very close; they go down to the last couple of minutes. So I'm looking forward to it. Very disappointed as a Montreal sports fan this weekend, but hey, there's always the Canadiens next year.
Okay, and by the way, the Jonas Brothers will be the halftime show. And did you see Greg's comment?
No, I
P.S.
did not.
Okay.
Oh, here it is.
P.S. By the way, both of you are from Montreal and smarting from the loss to the Argos, but our Bombers will help you deal with your grief. He's a big Winnipeg fan.
I agree. You know what, Greg? I like Winnipeg as well. I'll put my money down on them, and I think this is their fourth or fifth straight Grey Cup appearance. So definitely a dynasty happening there, and I wish I really hope they win. I just don't like Toronto sports teams. I'm sorry. It's just the way I was raised. I was raised properly.
Oh, wow. And with that, it's a wrap for this week. A couple of things to remember. If there is a major breaking event somewhere, watch for us to pop up to offer our comments while seeking your comments. And remember to please like and subscribe to and share our channel to help it grow. Night Talk returns in 7 days from Montreal. Good night.
Good night.